Autism Spectrum Disorders, Part 2. We'll begin with language disorders. A language disorder can be a language delay, failure to use language to communicate, or difficulty with understanding language. Communicative intent is a term just refers to the use of gestures, facial expressions, verbal output, and/or written communication to deliver a message. It's communication to obtain attention from someone or to get their attention or for social purposes. Some people with autism are nonverbal. Previous estimates claimed approximately 50% of people with autism were nonverbal, but that was using the old DSM-4 diagnostic criteria. Today, the estimates are closer to 25%. It's important to remember that verbal skills cannot always be correlated with intelligence. There are some people who are absolutely brilliant with autism that are completely nonverbal. Let's look at a couple other terms here. Echolalia, think of the root word echo. It means repeating words or phrases. Sometimes it used to be called parroting. If I might ask a child, "How are you today?" they may reply with, "How are you today?" I might say, "Would you like bananas or some grapes?" Bananas or some grapes might be their response. The term prosody means monotone or a sing-song voice when speaking, regardless of intent. Not all students with autism display all of these language characteristics. Some do, and to various degrees. Proxemics means the socially acceptable distance to maintain between people during a conversation. Not standing too close when communicating with someone or being right in their face, but also not shouting at them from across the room when trying to have a conversation. Pragmatics is the whole social use of language, and that is different for each culture, and it is rich, and it involves all of that social interaction like saying please and thank you, using vocal inflection, which could be impacted by prosody. Even things like staying on a single topic, even if others aren't interested, talking at just extreme degrees about something over and over again, or repeating a phrase over and over again. I worked with a student who would ask for help in a question format. When asking for a straw, she would say, "Do you need a straw?" When asking for help, she would tap me on the arm and say, "Do you need some help?" Now let's move on to some of the more common behavior characteristics of autism spectrum disorders. Self-stimulatory behaviors, sometimes called stimming for short, can interfere with learning and even social acceptance. It is the repetitive, stereotype behavior pattern. And sometimes in your textbook, it actually says they appear to have no apparent function, although they are sometimes associated with stress, unquote, friend. They absolutely are rigid, sometimes repetitive movements or even vocal sounds. But what they often do is serve a calming purpose. It can help to regulate the sensory environment. Sometimes you can see things like rocking, hand flapping, spinning of objects, or even fidgeting with objects. Alas, the birth of the fidget spinners. Remember those? In the Netflix series Atypical, the main character, Sam, perseverates on penguins. Again, this can be tied to interests, routines. I've had a student who perseverates on dinosaurs or baseball statistics and facts. Even a student who perseverated on the movie Cars starring Lightning McQueen, Mater, Sally, and Sarge. Typically, it's an intense interest and passion for a subject or topic, and it can be good in many ways, like when tied to new learning or used as a reinforcer, but sometimes students just seem to become stuck. It's that uncontrolled persistence, and it continues to an exceptional degree. Generalization difficulties are the difficulties in transferring knowledge from one setting to another. Skills that are sometimes taught in isolation need to be practiced in broader contexts and across many different settings. For example, if a child learns how to tell time on the clock in the classroom, they'll need to practice on the different clocks at home to generalize that information there. And then maybe at the clock at grandma's house and in other locations to truly get a sense of being able to tell time in multiple ways at different places. Think back to kindergarten. Do you remember learning about the 5 senses? Take a moment to list them. What if I told you there were actually 7 senses? Let's review the ones you know, and let me introduce you to 2 more. You may have learned about your 5 senses, the sense of touch, sight, smell, taste, and hearing, but there are 2 additional senses that we'll want to discuss as well. The sense of balance, we call vestibular, and the sense of body awareness, called proprioception. Before we take a deeper dive into the senses, we need to understand that many students with autism spectrum disorder have difficulty processing everyday information. Sensory issues can involve both hyposensitivities, which is the under-responsiveness, or lower or diminished sensitivity. This results in behaviors that crave stimulation, like swinging, which provides vestibular stimulation. It can also be hypersensitivities, or over-responsiveness, or an increased sensitivity to stimulus. Sometimes we call this sensory overload. This results in behaviors that block out stimulation, the way earphones block out sound. Sensory differences can have a significant impact on behavior. Therefore, it's important to have an understanding of the sensory system, as it will provide you with insight into many behaviors that are a result of under or overstimulation. Let's look at the tactile sense, or the sense of touch. If a child experiences hyposensitivity or endersensitivities, he or she may crave touch, tight hugs, weighted blankets, surfaces with tactile feedback, or even tight clothing. The child may chew on everything or have a high pain threshold. They may be self-abusive, hitting, pinching, head banging, or be unaware when hands or face are dirty, or their nose is running. If a child is hypersensitive or overstimulated, touch can be painful or uncomfortable. They may be sensitive to temperature, too hot or too cold. They may dislike having anything on hands or feet, have difficulty with brushing their teeth or hair because of head sensitivities. They may find food textures uncomfortable if they're too hot or too cold, or the texture itself may be not conducive to their liking. The interesting thing is the child can be both hyper and hyposensitive. Take, for example, my nephew. When he was younger, he could only wear very soft, large cotton t-shirts without tags. It sometimes took him 20 to 30 minutes, sometimes an hour, to even get his shoes on, to get the laces just right, not too tight and not too loose. Shoe shopping with him was a nightmare for my sister. While having these hypersensitivities, he also experienced quite a bit of hyposensitivity. He dislocated his shoulder one time and waited for several days before even telling my sister that his arm hurt. Vestibular sense, or the sense of balance, can represent in children with hyposensitivities or undersensitivities to this in the need to rock, swing, or spin to get that sensory input. Oftentimes, they crave fast movement and they can appear to be thrill seekers. Hypersensitivity or overstimulated represents when a child has difficulty with quick movements. They can experience car sickness or have difficulty stopping quickly or during activities. Proprioception has to do with body awareness and where your body is in space. Sometimes These children can be hyposensitive or undersensitive. They may stand too close to others, difficulty with proximity, bump into people or items. They may seek out jumping, bumping, crashing activities, and enjoy roughhousing. Sometimes they prefer tight clothing, heavy blankets, or they may clench or grind their teeth. They may like to chew on things like their lips, straws, pencils, and they may frequently fall on the floor intentionally. Hypersensitive or overstimulated may have difficulty with fine motor skills, manipulating small objects like Legos or crayons or other small toys. They may move their whole body rather than just their head to look at something. Let's first look at visual or sight. A child who is hyposensitive or undersensitive may complain about seeing double. Objects could appear dark or lose some of their features. They may have poor depth perception or write at a slant, either up or down, have difficulty copying or difficulty finding differences in pictures. Children may also fatigue easily when reading, writing, or playing video games. Visual hypersensitivity or overstimulation can present as a child having distorted vision. Bright lights can be painful or appear to jump around. Images may be fragmented, and they may have light sensitivity, or it may be easier to focus on some of the small details of pictures rather than the whole object. For olfactory or smell, hyposensitivity or undersensitivity means when a child has little to no sense of smell or fails to notice even extreme odors. This can include their own body odor. Hypersensitivity means their smells can be overpowering or intense. They may dislike certain scents like perfumes or shampoos. Gustatory is the sense of taste. A child who is hyposensitive or undersensitive will tend to enjoy very spicy foods. Sometimes they'll even eat or mouth non-edible items such as dirt or grass. Hypersensitive is overstimulated, and that causes some flavors and foods to be too strong or overpowering because the children may have very sensitive taste buds. They may have a preference for very bland foods. Certain textures can cause discomfort. These hypersensitivities to food often cause restricted diets. I had a student once who just loved strawberries, Cheetos, and a certain brand of pizzas. Unfortunately, that's pretty much all he ate. Auditory, or the sense of hearing. A child who is hyposensitive or undersensitive may only hear sounds in one ear, have partial hearing, or hear within normal limits but just tune out sounds. They may not acknowledge particular sounds or enjoy noisy places or sounds. Hypersensitive or overstimulated is where noise can be magnified and sounds can become distorted or muted. They may be able to hear conversations in the distance or have the inability to filter out sounds like the clock ticking on the wall or in the background. Sometimes things like fire alarms can be very painful and very stressful for students with those oversensitivities. An understanding of the sensory system will provide you with insight into some of the behaviors individuals with autism spectrum disorders may have, as many behaviors are the result of under or overstimulation in the sensory system.